The NBA insults the Brooklyn Nets with a back-to-back in Denver taking on the Nuggets. Too many excuses to list right now as we tap into a Nets loss coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets. Every single day over there, you'll find Doug Norney. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. And Doug, it must have been the altitude. I think the sickness probably got the best of the Brooklyn Nets on this one.
Oh, yeah. Look, we talked about this going into the game on the preview and kind of coming out of the Suns game, that there's sometimes on the schedule you get what are called schedule losses. It's a nice way to feel better as a fan at times. And there's just a reality to it as well, right? There's a lot of things stacked against you, right? Like you have to travel on a back-to-back, which the Nets had to do going from Phoenix to Denver. Denver is already a tough place to play, even when you have been able to get acclimated and hung around in the altitude for a while. And so coming in there with no time to acclimate on the back-to-back in a hard-fought game against Phoenix, that's going to be tough no matter what Denver it looks like as a team. And then you get Denver,
Denver that looks like this team,
who are the basically, no KCP, but otherwise full version of themselves that essentially won the championship last year with the best player in basketball. And you just start stacking up these different things. And again, it's not an excuse-making time. It's just reality. The reality is this was going to be an incredibly heavy lift. And once you factor in all that stuff, it's hard to be too disappointed, with the understanding that the Nets need to win every single game, to really give themselves any kind of chance this year. So any loss is a loss. But there was just a ton of stuff stacked against them for this one.
Yeah, 124-101 is the final here. It's the Nuggets going away, obviously. And there's some things just from a shooting perspective that if you needed some luck, the Nets did not get any of that early in this one. But let's start with the main problem here, right? When you go and face the Joker, when you face Jokic, I just, because there's a couple of things that bother me. There's some changes that you're going to cover as far as what the Nets tried to do in this one. What you can't do when you're playing Nikola Jokic is say, what we like is giving you easy access into the lane. And then it's kind of your choice. You want to drop off the pass. You want to find somebody in the corner. You want to take your own look. I will say, after all those things that we listed, and tongue-in-cheek at the top about altitude and everything else, though they are factors, you got to come in with a more aggressive game plan to say you are not going to have the ability, time, and consistent opportunities to dictate tempo, right? The Nets just felt very too much like they were going into a game of, hey, we're basically on the same level here. We have all the same players and same skill sets. Let's see who comes out on top. You need to be a little bit more disruptive with that. And I thought Joker just looked like he was very comfortable early in this one.
It looked incredibly easy. It often looks very easy for him in a way that's sometimes disturbing when you watch it and you're like, it looks so easy. It looks so effortless. It looks like he's putting almost no effort into it. Everything's kind of, take this with the way it's intended. Everything looks soft. And I don't mean soft bad. I just mean kind of like it just doesn't look hard, right? Like it just doesn't look
taxing. It doesn't look like he had to labor
taxing.
to do
And
it.
even the shot, like even if you watch the shots go up, they just go up in such a soft way, but then they all go in, right? Like they'll bounce on the rim a few times and then they're going in. I think what happened with the Nets here in this game was they made a functional choice early, which is you really can't cover him. So what are we okay with happening and what are we okay with not happening? I think they did not want to happen was, like, for instance, trying to double team him high, because what happens there? Well, you get back cut, and it's just a total layup line, right? The second you bring help to defend him, that these guys are all awesome at it. Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, and between the pick and roll with Jamal Murray, and then just these guys cutting. If you bring help, he's just going to find it, and they're going to run to the basket. So I think what they were saying to themselves was, we're not going to allow that part. if you want to get closer to the basket and get a more contested shot in like the sort of like the Jokic mid range, we'll be okay with that. But and if you're gonna get some threes, we're okay with that also, Jokic or the other shooters. But what we're not going to do is just have this thing spread all the way out and have everyone running free to the basket. I think that's kind of what their plan was. And it makes sense, too, when you look at some of the rotations that the Jacques Vaughn ran out, which were much different in this game than they have been in others. I think that's to me what I thought was seemed to me the plan. And again, it's not like there's any right way to do this. It's all hard. He's awesome. He's really kind of undefendable in a lot of ways. And when you surround them with this kind of talent, it gets incredibly difficult. So I know what you're saying. It looks super easy, but I think it was a function of the process. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that that's, I think, what the plan was.
No, because when you look, and we said this in the game preview, Joker's been lower in his 3-point shooting this season. I mean, there were moments in this game when he was out there at the top of the arc. And to your point, the Nets made an active choice. They said, take him if you want him. And almost to Joker's credit, Jokic didn't take him. He only took 2 attempts from beyond the arc. So again, the patience that he shows here, this is really, it's about complimenting how good that he is, right? Goes for a triple-double, 15, 10, and 26 in this one. That seemed to get there very casually. And
I was gonna say, in no minutes, by the way. He was at a triple-double at, I think, like the 27-minute mark for himself, or 26-minute mark. It was a triple-double with complete and utter ease. If it had stayed close, we're talking he would have been in the 20-20 range, 30-20 range easily.
And by the way, he played 30 minutes, just to your point, total in this game. He led the starters in minutes because this one got out of control, in the second half, got away from the Nets a little bit, obviously, as well. So, I mean, yeah, it's not, again, this isn't what a terrible coaching decision. You didn't stop Nikola Jokic, right? Like, it's more that these games like these on back-to-backs, again, no excuses. When you're feeling tired and you need some things to go your way, everything from basically jump in this game, you felt like, well, that didn't go our way. Well, that's not a lucky break. Okay, This is going to be a problem. And that was really the theme of this game. So as we start to work our way through it, we will talk about, I'll just say, the very unlucky nature of a lot of the Nets shots early in this one and the things that did not go their way, along with some other adjustments rotation-wise that Doug mentioned from Jacques Vaughn. We'll get into all that coming up here in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, we'll tell you about our friends over at Dave. Look, there's going to be times in your life where you just need a little financial help. This is why Dave is great. Dave can help you get cash when you need a hand between paychecks, if you're trying to build credit by settling extra cash advances on time. It can be super useful, like things that come up in your life, parking tickets, maybe the unexpected doctor bill, that car service light goes on. That can be just a total gut punch. Thankfully, Dave is here to help with the extra cash. Dave is the banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you can get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. It's part of Dave's extra cash account advance, the money you need with no interest, and then you just settle up later. Download Dave today at dave.com/LockedOnNBA. That's dave.com/LockedOnNBA. Get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now, or go to dave.com/LockedOnNBA. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member FDIC.
All right, so as we continue, the 124-101 post-game loss for the Brooklyn Nets. A reminder here that not all games are created equal and not all point differentials feel created equal, because the Nets were down 7 after the first. And then they're down an additional 6 after the second. So they're down 13 points at the break. And I said this at the time, might as well have been 30, because it just did not feel like, and this is unrelated to anything, every shot, open shots, bunny looks, at one point, the Nets missed point blank, uncontested. And by the way, the Denver Nuggets also do a great job of being around their old friend DeAndre Jordan. Bit of an annoyance for the Brooklyn Nets last night. But even the point blank, got the extra rebounds, got second chance opportunities. It was like you could have 4 looks on a possession, and none of them were going to go in for Brooklyn, clanking, double rimming in and out. It was brutal from that standpoint. And again, in a game like this on the back-to-back where you go, well, if the threes fall early, we can really make a problem here for Denver. And it was like, okay, never mind. Nothing's going down. Like, pack it in. This is going to be a really long night.
Yeah, I joked during the game that they missed missed all their shots to the rim, but at least they missed all their threes too. Like they just
consistency matters, Doug. Consistency matters.
they just couldn't. It was really crazy, and it was funny too because it really kind of happened to Denver as well. Denver missed a ton of easy shots also. It wasn't just the Nets.
Yeah, that was a group effort
on
there in the second quarter for a while.
That exactly. There was one stretch. It had to be like a 2.5 minute stretch where I can't remember who scored, but I remember when they scored. I thought to myself, I took a breath out.
Finally got to the rim, and it was like, oh, somebody did it.
Someone did it. Someone finally did it because it was just bunny miss, pull up miss, right, 3-point miss, things rimming out, things sitting on the rim. I counted in all, and I counted 18 shots that the Nets missed in the restricted area. 18. That's impossible without trying. I mean, that's like what would happen if you and I stood out there with Jokic and we took shots in the restricted area and he blocked everything, and it would just be this sea of missed shots on the shot chart. And 18's in the restricted area. There's a few that are right outside. I mean, we're getting to the 20s early. If we're just going to call it shots easily, I mean, if we're just going to talk about shots around the rim, they just couldn't make a single thing. Couldn't make the hard ones. Couldn't make the easy ones. There is a world where I think if you run this sim out 10,000 times, the Nets aren't winning it, but there's versions of this game, but there's versions of this game that actually do look a lot closer, at least in the end, had some of these easier shots gone down, because it wasn't like they had bad looks. They just really couldn't. And then once it gets away, once you let go of the rope, it's like fully over. But there's a version of this where their shot selection does convert at even somewhat close to a normal rate. And I think we're talking about a much closer game. So I mean, if you're not going to hang your hat on that, but I mean, man, I'm with you. It was brutal to watch because it really just felt like at one point nothing was going to go in.
No, I mean, the starters combined 5 of 19 from beyond the arc. And I mean, like, and even that's so, that's not indicative of how rough those looks were. Like Cameron Johnson goes 2 of 7, 2 of 6 from Mikal Bridges. 1 for 4 for Spencer Dinwiddie. Thomas actually goes 0 for 2, doesn't take a lot of shots. Nick Claxton, by the way, after a brilliant knockdown in the Phoenix game, doesn't even bother attempting a 3. I just feel like there's some type of disconnect there when it comes to the coaching staff. But just, yeah, to your point, it didn't feel like it was going to go their way. And oddly enough, this was made mention on the broadcast because I sometimes switch in between the local feed versus, Nets coverage. And they were saying it's like when you go look at it, Denver has had one of the more brutal starts to the season in terms of scheduling. They've had 6 back-to-backs to start their year. They've had Jamal Murray in and out of the lineup dealing with his ankles. And so, you come in, there's no looking at the record and going, oh, maybe Denver's not as good this year. But it is a team that is now probably starting to get healthy, starting to get into the easier portion of the schedule. You get a home game here, right? So I think there's something about like trying to kick off the next run for this team as well. And by the way, in the third quarter, when you're the Brooklyn Nets and you go, well, listen, and I have a problem. I believe in this team irrationally at times. I was like, listen, missing all your shots, Joker's a real issue. Can't get anything going, but you don't count this team out down 13 at halftime. You wait to see. Oh, sorry, they lost the third quarter by 10 points. I apologize. It just, and that was it. Like the first 5 minutes of the third quarter too, you were like, okay, you're not going to get there on this. And at that point, we end up getting, we start getting looks at some of the bench players and deep cut guys because it's not going to get home. Was there anything just before we move on to maybe some of these bench players and what this road trip looks like continuing forward on the West Coast for the Nets? Was there anything functionally that Jock Vaughn did in this game differently, which I know he did a number of things that you think hurt them in terms of trying something different in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, there were clearly things that were a bit different here. It's hard to tell if it was a function of sort of the schedule or trying something new. I mean, they clearly switched up the rotations earlier this time in a way that hadn't really happened as much. I mean, Dinwiddie was a very early sub out along with Claxton at, I believe, the 5 minutes into the first quarter or something like that. It was really, really early. And actually funny too, because Dinwiddie picked up 2 fouls, and I was, you know how hard I tilt when guys get taken out because of foul trouble. But I was like, why are they taking him out with 2 fouls? Like, he's never going to foul out. The guy averages like 1.7 fouls a game. He's not a candidate to foul out. But then people rightfully pointed out that Watford had already been set to check in. That's totally different. Like Watford coming in and checking in that early in the game. Again, that could have been this is a Jokic thing. Let's get length in there early. Let's get a big guy, a big rangy guy in there that can deal with Jokic early, and we'll get Dinwiddie out, and Watford's sort of like a secondary ball handler, and Cam Thomas can kind of pick up some more of like that's a clear difference in what they had done. Now, again, I can't tell if that was Jokic and schedule specific or something that they want to try moving forward. I tend to think it's the former, but I will say I'll give Vaughn credit on this one. There's been a willingness to try different things here. I think in a good way. We saw it with Phoenix. I think this was another case of it, and I think that's a good thing with the kind of guys that they have. So I saw those as differences in terms of the X's and O's. Like I mentioned it before, in terms of like how they were like sort of felt like they had to pick your poison with Jokic.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's correct. You could probably make a case to have a different starting lineup against him. Like maybe not start Dinwiddie or Thomas and start Watford or start DFS or guys like this and bring like extra length. I think there's a for sure case for that.
Yeah, it's interesting because they did say that Coach Vaughn mentioned coming into Mile High and the altitude that he's going to try to run a little bit shorter minute runs, right? Get guys out a little bit quicker, shrink what their stretches would normally be on the court. So that's where you can see a Watford coming in a little bit sooner, but that's also a switch up in the hierarchy of who's coming in. You throw on top of that Dorian Finney-Smith, who was dealing with knee soreness coming into the game, is questionable. Then they say he's going to be available, but when you go back and look at the box score, now again, skewed based on it being a blowout, but he only gets in there for 16 minutes. Didn't see Royce O'Neal at nearly as much as we have in recent games. And just if you go by his plus minus, there's a good reason for that. But to your point, I wonder if it's like these are hard ones because you very rarely say, well, whatever your best 5 players are, those are the best 5 players you want to start games and you want them to play the most minutes and you take your chances with it. But because the Brooklyn Nets don't have the clear-cut superstar elite players, sometimes you say, well, Jokic is a really long guy, and our best version of our lineup is pretty small. So maybe we do, just to your point, it's like maybe we kind of swing for the fences here on a back-to-back, right? Let's try to win on confusion to a certain extent of giving them a look that they just haven't seen before. I probably would have been fine with it. I think we also would have absolutely dumpstered the idea if they went out there and got destroyed in the first 5 minutes of the game. You'd go, what is Coach Vaughn thinking? You're putting in Trendan Watford. You're not starting Cam Thomas or whatever the case may be, right?
It's really hard, the optics around moves like that. I mean, unless you're really struggling, right? Like, it's really hard to come off of a win against Phoenix and then change something, right? Like, so, because the optics on it are weird. It could signal something else. It tells the wrong story to the players. I think what I actually do think one thing that folks will consistently underrate is the ego management. And I don't even mean ego in a bad way here. Every player, if these guys all have massive egos, it's one of the main reasons they got to the NBA. It's a compliment, right? So you have to like believe in yourself to a ridiculous level to make it to this level. This is not a pejorative. I do think people underrate how much that plays into some of these decisions, the locker room management piece of it, where consistency, starters, who's a starter, who isn't, right? And so, and by the way, we're only talking about a few guys because, like, obviously McHale's going to start, like Claxton's probably going to start, right? So, like, we're already only talking about a few dudes here, and I do think that people underrate, maybe us too, the conversations and the attitudes that have to happen later off the court when major changes are made, and I think that's the case against it. But I'd be for it though. If there's a team you're going to make a big change for, this would be the one. They're just a totally different, unique problem that's presented to you.
Coming up here in a second, we'll talk about the guys that came in and played a few more minutes. I have a little bit of a tidbit on a Trendan Watford and thinking maybe this could be indicative of things to come, and also reminding the closeout to this West Coast trip and what Brooklyn needs to accomplish to make it a success. We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, we're going to tell you about our good friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made so easy. That's because they took all the most fun parts of daily fantasy, removed the difficult parts, and just gave you a product that you'll want to get into every single day. With basketball, all you're doing on Prize Picks, you're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. They put up the numbers. You decide more or less on points, more or less rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. You put 2 to 5 of those players together, you can win up to 25 times your money. Like I said, you're not wrestling with salaries. You're not going against sharks in the water. You're not even worried so much about injuries. They have a reboot policy. So if one of your players gets injured, you're going to get that thing rebooted. It's the only daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. Look, they made this for the fans. They want you to make it be easy. They want it to be fun. PrizePicks has just solved all this stuff. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA. First deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the 101, I almost said 121. Why not? We can have revisionist history. Let's say it was closer in our minds. 101, Brooklyn Nets, they fall to the Denver Nuggets. One last thing I'll note here, just in this game, is you say maybe you want to bring in a little bit more length. You want to use some Trendan Watford. And because of the altitude, you also got Jalen Wilson in this game way sooner than you ever probably normally would as well. Like, so, and it's good, by the way. Like, the other part of this, I'll just briefly say, is when you feel like on a back-to-back and coming off a big win and the altitude and everything else, the scheduled loss, right, as we said at the top, it's okay to kind of lean into some other guys sooner and just give them a little bit of a taste, because the one thing that you're not getting specifically, say, with Jalen Wilson is he's coming in for pure garbage time. He's not coming in for, quote, real NBA minutes. Well, he got some of those. Now, they were rough for not only him sometimes individually, but just rough for the team overall, but it's good. So I think Jock Vaughn gets value out of that. Just make sure that he gives these guys a little bit of a taste. Giles plays a lot of minutes late in this one as well. But on Trendan Watford, I really hope that we're getting to the place here where a guy like him is starting to chip into the, I should have a role. It should not be, well, because of this particular matchup, maybe we want to use me a little bit more here. Or because of the back-to-back, I'm going to get in there early because we're running shorter rotation minutes. Like, I just prefer that he starts to chip away and really carve out a role for himself. Not because I like young players and I think he can develop well, because he has the skill set that the Nets lack oftentimes inside of these two units. Ball handling, little perimeter shooting, some length. He certainly has some defensive aggressiveness to him, even if it's not always perfect. So do you agree that, like, Watford, out of all these guys, Watford is the one that has probably gotten himself as close as possible to saying, well, you should just be a part of the nightly game plan, even to whatever small extent?
Yeah, I mean, he's the closest proxy for Ben Simmons on the roster, right? So if you came into the season thinking, Simmons was going to be a big part of sort of how you were going to function as an offense, and thinking that you needed his particular set of skills to handle a bunch of different sort of like assignments, Watford's clearly the closest guy that they have to that right now. He's different than Simmons, so I'm not really comparing them in every way, but in terms of like length, he's got ball handling ability. He can run DHO actions. He's pretty feisty on defense. He can guard a number of different guys. I mean, he can actually, unlike Simmons, he can actually shoot some. And so that's a little bit of a difference. Obviously, doesn't have like the athleticism or overall vision that Simmons has. So there's a give and take here. But just in terms, 6'8", 230, he's a big dude with a long wingspan. I'm with you. And I actually think that this tonight, sort of mentioning that early, how early he came in on that first rotation, is a sign that it's like, this is a real thing, right? This is not just, I don't think this is just,
sorry.
Excuse me. Yeah. I don't think we're in just this is a nice spot for him. I think the rotation minutes, especially with these other guys, DSJ not being able to come off the bench, Lonnie Walker not being able to come off the bench for a scoring spark, going with just him as a sort of a different guy that can mix and match. Because one of his like sort of mini superpowers is that he can kind of play with everyone the Nets have, right? Like he can play the 4, so you can pair him with Claxton. He can play a kind of small ball 5 if you really need him to in a pinch. So, and once you can do those two things, you can literally play with everyone on the roster. And so I think we're probably going to end up seeing more of him. I'm totally with you that he deserves it. And I don't think last night's game was a mistake. I think it was, we're starting to really, really trust this guy.
Yeah, and that's a good sign. I mean, we say no matter what's going to happen here over the short term, the long term, the trade deadline, anything else, you just got to start to tap into something else. Because, by the way, you also need to uncover something additionally here, because, Royce O'Neal isn't always going to be your hot hand sharpshooter. I think there's some shelf life to what he's been able to be from a consistency standpoint. And then defensively, it's like we've seen some of the, whether it's age, whether it's just functional, as you mentioned about Watford being able to play with different players, right? Rotation wise, and being able to kind of be a little more flexible there. Watford seems like a good guy to get that opportunity. The other thing we'll close out on here is that this is the West Coast trip. And if you told us coming in that the Nets were 1-2 after playing the Kings and playing the Suns and playing the Nuggets, we'd say, yeah, that sounds about right. I think we say that's even a little bit nicer.
Sounds about great.
Well, and they beat the Suns, right? Like beating the Suns. Because you could have made I'm not speaking ill of the Kings. They're a very good team, right? But when you don't have a Kevin Durant or a Nikola Jokic, you go, yeah, we could beat this team, and that's dismissive of the Kings. But being 1-2 and getting a win against a full strength, the first time of the Big Three Suns is great. Now, though, when you're going to close this thing out, next up with the Golden State Warriors, and then one more game to go, it kind of becomes, at least for me, I do look at it and say, gosh, I got to tell you, based on the schedule, based on these teams, based on what this team has done so far, the Brooklyn Nets, when you play Golden State and Utah, any other years, I might have said it differently. This year, I'm saying, oh, maybe you should go 3-2 on this West Coast trip and beat both of these teams at the door. Not because they're easy, but because you have been good enough to take these teams on. Like, you have been good enough and shown you're capable of beating them, and because they're going to get time off here before they play Golden State on Saturday. They won't play Utah until Monday, and then they come home for that 3-game homestand starting with the Knicks.
Yeah, we're not going to do a game preview for this Golden State game just because of the timing of sort of how it's going up. I will say they're catching Golden State at a really interesting time because, they just last night. So we're recording this Friday morning. Last night, Golden State switched up their starting lineup. Obviously, Draymond Green's been suspended indefinitely. Who knows when he's going to come back? They actually moved Andrew Wiggins to the bench, and they moved. They had Sarge starting, and then they moved him back, and then they did not start Chris Paul when back. They started Braden Pajemski and Jonathan Kuminga against the Clippers. Now they lost, and Harden just completely lit them up. But Warriors are clearly at a having something of like an existential and basketball crisis right now.
Yeah.
And so you never root for bad things to happen to teams. And that's just, but right now, if you think you're catching the Warriors at a good time, I mean, how could you catch them at a better time? Like, they have no idea if they're coming or going. Like, they don't know who's starting. The guys that they've relied on, like Wiggins, are just kind of dumpstered, right? Like, everyone looks off. They just had to suspend this guy because he can't stop punching and choking people, right? It's like, it's just they're kind of a total mess.
One of their guys kind of lost the grip on NBA basketball reality a little bit here.
Totally. I mean, totally. They're 10-14. We're really close to circling the drain territory, and which is a shame because, like, you don't want to see this. He just came out the other day that they had offered Clay an extension in the offseason. He declined it, and then he's totally sucked. So, like, it's like unclear what's going to happen there. I mean, this team has a lot of problems. And so this is all to say, one, I'm actually really interested in what this line will be because it's hard to have tons of faith in Golden State at this point. And it's still Steph, right? It's still Clay. These guys can absolutely light you up from time to time. Point of attack defense is the Nets' problem. This is a team that's if you have a point of attack defense problem, like, this is the worst matchup. So there are problems, but catching Golden State when they're at sort of reaching their nadir, I think that clearly looks like what's happening here.
And you would love that one of the themes of this season for the Nets, right? You're a deep team. You're now, by the way, it's something we haven't really mentioned because it's just an obvious thing when lines come out. The Nets have gone with the same starting lineup for now 5-6 games. Like, took a long time to get here, and that's due to injuries and everything else. But this is the starting lineup we're going with. Maybe it's a little bit more Trendan Watford lumped in there, but we know it's been Dorian Finney-Smith, and we're not going to see any Lonnie Walker on this trip. Jock Vaughn said that. Probably not going to see any Dennis Smith Jr. Like, so the guys you're not going to have. The guys you've had. They've all been contributors, right? So this feels like one of those ones, at least for this first game. But ironically, out of the two, I know what the Utah's up to, but out of the two, I'm like, oh, you should definitely beat the Warriors right now. These guys are all over the place, and they still have a lot of the commiserate pieces.
Got to be they've got to beat the Jazz too.
I know. You and I never would have said this. We said coming in 2-3 would have been a successful road trip for this team. But once you get that first win there inside of that first 3 set, which was the more difficult of the halves of this trip, so to speak, now you look at these two and you start licking your chops and you're like, 3-2 West Coast trip. Like, this is a real success moment for this season that's already been going so well for the Nets. Like, you got to get
real quick before we get out of here. But that starting unit that you mentioned that they've kept on, the Dinwiddie, Cam, McHale, CJ, and Claxton group that's played 64 minutes. You want to take a guess at what their net rating is?
Plus, now this is a bad game though here against the Nuggets. I'll still say plus 5 net rating.
You're off by 17 and not in a good way. Minus 12.5.
Yeah. Because the Denver game totally dumpstered it, right?
Phoenix. I mean, they there's been other issues too.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm
time to switch it up, Jock.
No, I'm mostly joking. It's been they've run. It's gotten run out against some rough teams. So I just sometimes you want to check it on these things. Like, hey, what's working, what isn't? Okay, are gonna get out of here.
Yeah.
If there's some kind of like amazing, crazy thing that happens with the Warriors game, there's a good chance we'll come live after that game. We'll kind of play that one by ear, see how it goes. Hate to do that to you out there because I know you want consistency with that. And during the week, that's the goal. Sometimes on the weekends though, it's gonna be like. It's gotta move the needle a little bit, probably.
Juice worth the squeeze, Doug?
So keep a follow on Twitter. At Adam Arbrecht, at Doug Norrie. We'll put announcements out there, or just subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube and set those alerts so you get an alert and you'll know when we're going live. What am I saying here? Oh yeah, subscribe over to Locked On Nets on YouTube. There we
go. Time is what we want most, but what we use worst, Doug, and that's William Penn.
Oh. R.I.P. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again, hopefully on Saturday, but maybe next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, yeah.